I'm joined by my guest, though. I want to bring him in. We are joined with the man himself, Arnaud Develay. He is an author, political analyst, and international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the American Political Consensus. Arnaud, man, welcome to the show. How you doing? You doing okay?
Hello, Jamal. I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it. I am confused on something. And so I've been asking people when they come on the show in order to get their take and to try to maybe help me orient myself. Trump has initiated a new mineral deal. Now, putting in quotes because it's not a mineral deal. It's for basically all of the industries in Ukraine, right? Oil, gas, rare earths, pretty much anything. With the idea that Ukraine has paid the United States $300 billion back with a 4% interest. And we get controlling factor in all of it up until the point where it's paid back. That is astonishing. Now, Zelensky has balked at this, has ran to Europe. Europe has patted him on the head, said, it's okay, it's okay. We're working on something. We're going to work with you on this. Trump knows, at least I would hope he knows, that Zelensky can't sign that deal. That deal wouldn't even be approved if it went through the RADA. And yet, that deal is out there. Trump has doubled down on that, saying, hey, Zelensky is out here running around saying that he's balking against the deal and he wants NATO membership for it. He knows he's not going to get NATO membership for it. And in fact, he's like, look, you better sign the deal or else. Bad things are going to happen. What is going on here? Certainly he knows that Zelensky can't sign that deal. Or does he believe that the Ukrainian military is going to get so weak that Zelensky is going to be forced, bent, into shape to sign that deal? I don't know which one it is because I know I'm running long. If indeed it is true that Trump wrote that deal with the idea that Zelensky couldn't sign it, what does that mean?
Well, that's a good question.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It could also be a situation, my take on it, I mean, starting knowing Trump and how he kind of paints people into a corner where he anticipates that they might not be able to say either yes or no, depending on the context. And this allows him afterward to turn around to his domestic constituency and say, see, we can't do business with this person. We have to somehow find someone like Biden was fond of saying, with who's rock solid. When he was talking about the prosecutor general Shokin about that $1 billion loan guarantee. That's kind of the way I look at it. Because right now, obviously, Trump's range is limited. It's limited in time, in as far as the campaign promise that he made when he ran on putting an end to the war in Ukraine, and in as far as all those other files that we can imagine he wishes to handle before his term is over. And right now, what does he have to show for himself as far as foreign policy is concerned? Zilch, nothing. And in the Ukraine situation, you got to put the optics. You can't just do a 180 overnight. People would not understand this. So he understands first that he has to somewhat set the stage so that at some point he understands the guy is unreliable. That much he has internalized, I would assume. He understands that this guy is even more so unreliable that the Europeans are, going in the opposite direction and encouraging him to violate any kind of a ceasefire, that he, Trump, that is, somewhat discusses, even if it's orally at this point with the Russians. The guy, the Zelensky, within 24 hours violates it. So he makes Trump's look bad. So I think it's all part of, this setting the stage, showing the guy is a lunatic. He's disrespecting us. He's not listening. He does not. He basically spits on the hand that feeds him, i.e. the U.S.
Yeah.
And when we try to somehow put something forward, which is, par for the course in as far as how much we've invested in this stupid project. Let's call it what it is. The guy pretends to have conditions attached to his signature. But all this is, I think, a political theater, and that sets the stage at some point to more radical action. What are those radical actions going to be? I don't know.
Yeah.
But at this point, this is part of this. You have PR firms whose job it is to clean you up. When this is what happened in Ukraine, for instance. My book talks about it with the owner of Burisma, right? So he gave a call to this friend of his, the former president of Poland, who had very good connections in the Western establishment, and said, I've got a problem here. My assets are frozen in the UK. I'm on the shit list. I can't travel. Those guys in Kiev now that have been put in place by Nuland and co are gunning for me. I need you to somehow set me up, put me in touch with, the crowd that, can do something for me. And among other things, I'm willing to pay this firm. It's called Porter and something in the UK, and they're specialized in. They can make a dictator, look like Snow White. So, although Snow White, I'm wielding this with caution because the new Snow White, is actually not doing very well at the box office.
Right. When they wouldn't even have little dwarfs. It's like, are you serious? Like, are you
But
serious?
You get my point, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's in this particular situation, that's the other way around. We're trying to turn the Churchill of the 21st century into someone who's really, a biatch that needs to be slapped down once and for all, because for whatever reason he's been told a lot of things, and that ingratiates him to his own reflection in the mirror, and the guy has drank too much of his own Kool-Aid, and he's completely there's no way to get him to in a rational manner somehow take into account that there's a new administration that does not want to be remaining in this Ukraine thing any longer.
But
so that's my take on it. That's what I would say is going on right now. But I could be wrong. Who knows? With Trump, it's difficult to somehow read between the lines. But first things first. And this guy obviously is toxic. Is radioactive. He gets on everybody's nerves.
Yes, he does.
He does. That's So what do? You need new players. You need new partners to somehow Not to mention, the Russians have been clear on their side of things. The guy is illegitimate. So whatever agreement you enter into with this guy, signing it has no legal value whatsoever. So the consensus is clear from day one. First order of business is you got to get rid of him, but you can't just kind of like step in and just take him out. Although, what prevents from doing so?
There are people
they've done
who
it.
can do that. Yeah,
there are people who can do that.
Goons, right? So you can give $20 that would do that.
But
the other thing has to do with ceasefire. Now, the U.S. and Russia apparently entered into talks with the idea of reinitiating the Black Sea Initiative. This requires Europe, which is super interesting to me. And I'm wondering whether or not the U.S. and Russia are trying to do an end run around Europe for that deal. The other catch for this is the ceasefire is being violated almost immediately, almost as if an FU to Trump for even initiating the ceasefire in the first place. Russia has apparently pointed this out, saying, hey, here are all the violations to the ceasefire agreement. The United States doesn't seem to be doing anything about the fact that Kiev is violating the ceasefire agreement. Russia is sticking with it, though, apparently. At the very least, they've said they're sticking with it, despite the fact that Kiev is violating that deal. I'm not going to ask why. I understand why they're sticking with it. They want to show, hey, we've been consistent. These people are lunatics. I guess it's the thought from Russia's side. They don't really want to deal anyway. And all things being equal, what they want is to proceed with the war. But and one of the ways they can do that is by showing, well, Kiev is not a viable partner. They're not somebody we can work with. They're violating all of these deals every time we have them in the first place, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is your thought on this?
Well, the Russians are going to, by default, stick to the twin objectives of the special military operation, because that's one thing for sure that they have complete control over as a process.
Mhm.
Now, this being said, Putin and his people are rational actors, and if you can limit, the loss of life, you're going to explore every possible alternative to the conflict. To the extent, after years of literally no contact whatsoever with Washington on a diplomatic level, tit for tat, and I kick out your diplomats, and I do the same.
Mhm.
Um, this is almost like an
New day.
unexpected, and yes, it is. So you have to look at the big picture. You have to zoom out and look at it, because again, those are some of the, not some would say there are three of them, but two of the three superpowers in the current world order. So you've got to act responsibly, and you can't just condition your bilateral relationship on one particular file, i.e., the Ukraine file.
I see.
This being said, the Russians are moreover extremely legalist. They almost to a fault. I mean, they are very conservative in how they approach any kind of issue, whatever issue that might be. I mean, I'll take the example of the JCPOA, for instance.
Mhm.
The reason why the Iranians have not overreacted, for instance, and God knows provocations have been coming galore since 2018 and the unilateral withdrawal of the U.S. Provocations, the obviously the partial stance adopted by the IAEA was
Mhm.
completely, pro Western. Uh, the maximum pressure doctrine. So the Iranians have remained cautious. They've remained within the confine of the JCPOA, even when they resumed uranium enrichment per paragraph 26 and 36 of the deal, out of respect of the Russians basically having their back. Not
Mhm.
just the Russian, the Chinese too, but the Russians having their back. And so they have to, this idea that you don't want, if you start abandoning international standards, international agreement, and departing from good faith engagement with our Western partners, then you're not better than them. And the perception then in the rest of the world, which is kind of like the bride at the wedding that those two are vying for, better than this maverick and this rogue guy called the US. So somebody has to act as an adult, is what I'm saying, and
I
and
see.
and this is why, in that sense, great power, they are great powers, and as such, whether or not they abide or not abide to agreement, sets a precedent for then everybody else to say, well, if those guys who have such influence don't even respect international law, whether it's a treaty or a customary international law usage, custom, uh, there's no inside, there's no incentive for anybody else to do so. And don't forget, those countries are the founding members of the UN Charter.
Right.
So if it has to count for anything,
I guess my thing is,
so
if they can't abide by this, then how could you ever get a deal? And there are 2 points, right? If Ukraine can't abide by it, in one sense, and two, if the United States is not going to do anything to kind of push them to abide by it, then how could you ever get a deal with the United States on the issue of Ukraine?
well, you might not get a deal. To make it, a long story short, you might not get a deal. That's the whole point. At the same time, you have to be ready for any contingency, but you at
Mhm.
least have to provide the US the opportunity to come out and denounce its own proxies' lack of willingness to play ball, so that at least it's on the record. you know uh, so like I said, there might be a domestic component to it. I would assume there is, but it also has to be on the record on the international level, because how can you take the US leadership statements towards getting an agreement to put an end to the conflict, if bearing on something as trivial as a ceasefire or the resumption of a grain deal in the Black Sea, and the repeated violation thereof, you're not even hearing the sponsor say anything or denounce it or go on the record and say enough is enough. So that's the reason why Russia is they're standing pat. They're giving Trump some room, the Trump administration some room. Keep in mind that the fundamental, the what's called the root cause, basically, is a term we've heard a lot lately. The Russians have not heard any proposal of any kind bearing on addressing the root cause. So that's the first thing. Second of all, there would be a very easy way to show goodwill in putting an end to the conflict. It would be to basically turn off the spigot, money-wise,
Right.
weapon-wise, and intelligence-wise. We haven't seen that. So this being in the background, this is also what probably compelled Moscow a couple of days ago to come out in the open and say, hey, what about that ceasefire? I mean, we're trying to abide by it, but it doesn't seem as if you have any leverage on this guy here. So they're trying to go the US in showing more assertiveness in reining in Zelensky. But the problem is Zelensky has the Europeans whispering in his ears, telling him, we got your back no matter what happens. This grain deal are never going to happen because it would require the lifting of sanctions on the bank, the Russian bank. Yeah, and we're not going to do this. So the other guy, he's like a hoodlum who feels encouraged to keep on acting up the way he's been acting, and it's true to form, and that's what he knows best. And honestly, he has no incentive fundamentally himself to be part of a process that would see an end to the conflict. So it's a really, really messy situation, to be sure.
No, I agree with you. He should turn off the spigot. I mean, if Zelensky is going rogue in this way, turn off the spigot. And speaking of that, I want to show you this. I want to get your take on this. So this is Rubio is in Europe, and he is speaking with NATO members. And of course, you can imagine he's going to get an earful on the issue of NATO. He's going to get an issue on Greenland. This is what Rubio had to say.
Invest more in national security. But the events of the last few years, a full-scale ground war in the heart of Europe, is a reminder that hard power is still necessary as a deterrent. And so we do want to leave here with an understanding that we are on a pathway, a realistic pathway, to every single one of the members committing and fulfilling a promise to reach up to 5% of spending. That includes the United States will have to increase its percentage. Because if the threats truly are as dire as I believe they are, and the members of this alliance believe they are, then that threat has to be confronted by a full and real commitment to have the capability to confront.
Can Europe even do that? He's effectively saying, I want you to get 5%, even though you barely even gave 2% of your GDPs. That seems to be unfathomable from Europe.
Well, it's a kind of a Mexican standoff situation here. It's a tit for tat. I mean, he's trying to tell the Europeans, okay, you want to keep doing this. You guys want to keep being a pain, as far as this Ukraine deal is concerned. Fine, but you got to step up. You got to increase your participation to this construct called NATO, to the extent you still feel NATO being an indispensable organization, against because let's put it this way, it's a ghost threat. I mean, J.D. Vance said that much in Munich, right? Mm-hmm. There's no existential threat but yourself. But Rubio is in his role. I mean, he has to malax them, and he has to borrow some of their own terminology and trying to basically face their own contradiction. To the extent he knows, he has the figures, I would assume he does. And as you pointed out, they are not in a position to increase what he's asking for, what the Trump administration is asking for this to remain a viable path. The idea is, they're again providing the premise whereupon, to the extent they're not getting satisfaction down the road, they're going to say, hey, You guys want to be players, but you're not coming to the playground with any kind of skills.
Yeah.
And so you on your own. And so we're sorry, but why should we provide security for you?
So wait, you think he's effectively saying we need 5% because he
Yeah,
wants to effectively pull out in some way? Basically, look, you guys say you're under threat. You guys are terrified. You're saying that the Russians are trying to take over all of Europe. Fair enough. 5%, if that's what you
mhm,
really believe. I mean, now, to
yeah.
be fair, Rubio is a neocon. So Rubio may believe this
Mhm.
on some level. Um,
Well, I
James
mean,
Vance, yeah.
neocons are ideologues, but to the extent it's expedient for them to, borrow a page from Trump's book as far as having other people pay, they'll go along with that. It's fine. A neocon just wants a war anywhere he can find one. It doesn't really matter whether it's in Europe or in the Pacific or in the Middle East. you know, I think Rubio is more obsessed uh, with West Asia than Europe, as a matter of fact,
Yeah.
like any neocon would. I mean, we harken back to what those neocons used to say 20 years ago. Boys go to Baghdad and real men go to Tehran. So, you know, that's
Let's
okay with him.
let's go to Tehran for a bit. I am fascinated by this threat that Donald Trump has effectively launched at Israel. I'm sorry, at Tehran. Now, Iran has a security agreement with Russia. I would imagine that security agreement will undoubtedly back them up, if not necessarily militarily, with hardware, with equipment, those type of things, if indeed they were struck. But that is utter chaos. Like the chaos that would erupt if indeed the United States ended up some kind of bombing run on Tehran would be outrageous. Moscow itself has come out effectively warning this is a horrible idea. Don't do this. And even with the idea that they are willing to negotiate behind the scenes on behalf of Tehran, what would that negotiation be? I mean, the reality of it is Iran can't negotiate under threat. And so the very fact of putting a threat out and then saying you want to negotiate seems outlandish, especially considering Donald Trump was the one that killed the first JCPOA that was working, by the way. And as you pointed out, Iran stuck with it a year after Trump killed it. So, for one, do you think Trump is bluffing? I guess that's the first question.
I think he's trying to find his marker in this particular, like in any geopolitical file. He's not obviously someone who's versed into foreign policy. Those are complicated processes for him. He does not take into account the cultural, religious, even the local marker. In order to make an analysis, you have to compute all those factors.
Right.
And you have to listen to what people say and try to read between the lines of what they mean and how does that compute in the way that culture, this particular culture, means certain things. He's this kind of guy is like a bull in a china shop. He comes in and he thinks by just setting the bar very high, he'll be able to coax people into somehow make him look good. But one has to understand that this JCPOA, uh, the reason why Trump rejected it is because the U.S. at the Israelis' behest always wanted to enlarge the deal. There was an article actually written in the or produced as a white paper by one of those think tank in D.C. back in 2009. I
Mhm.
think it was the Center for Near East Policy. Was written by a guy who's admittedly a hardcore Zionist. And this idea of entering into negotiations with the Iranians bearing on their nuclear, mind you, they've declared their civil nuclear activity and they've signed on the non-proliferation regime treaty.
Right.
So the Iranians from day one, they were respecting international law, by joining the NPT,
Non-proliferation.
you allow automatically inspections. So they were perfectly in accordance with their obligations. It's just that they needed to have a sanction relief. So they entered into this protracted negotiation process, hoping to get some sanction relief. And the problem is that if you look at this white paper, that white paper said basically that the JCPOA, as it ended up being called, was never meant to be respected by the US. The idea was to, at some point, find fault with it and blame the Iranian for lack of cooperation, with the idea that the only way we could somehow allow Iran to think that we would lift any kind of sanctions is if they integrated into the negotiation two additional chapters. One bearing on their ballistics capabilities, and the second one bearing on the alleged influence carried out by Iran in the region, in as far as the some call it militias. Yeah, exactly. So this idea that we were only going to limit ourselves to inspecting or having some kind of transparent civil nuclear program was always misdirected from the get-go. The Israelis, they basically want Iran to basically surrender all the means of self-defense, bearing on its own political independence, national, and basically abandon support for the Palestinian cause. That's never going to happen.
This is nonsense. Yeah, that's never going to happen.
No. So at this point, we find ourselves, and that comes back to your original question: is he bluffing? Well, he has to basically play along with the Israeli playbook, but he's going to find himself soon faced with, again, reality. Reality is that you would, and I heard someone on your show come up to such conclusion, which is basically you're going to blow up your own term, your own presidency. Everything that you ran upon will be blown to smithereens, and it will be indeed worse than what happened with George Bush Jr. I mean, George Bush Jr., next to such a blunder by the Trump administration, would pass for like a frolic. So,
and by the way, they're using a similar argument. Like where George Bush was like, well, we think they have nuclear weapons. Scott Ritter was one of the inspectors that went there for the nuclear inspection. Ritter at some point realized that he wasn't there to inspect. He was there to effectively start a war. And they're doing something similar. Well, Iran may get nukes. Now, Tulsi Gabbard has come out saying Iran is not trying to get nukes. There's been a fatwa against nuclear weapons by the Ayatollah. And yet they're still coming up with this argument. Oh, they may get nukes. They may get nukes. All the while, Israel has nukes.
Yes, I know. Well, they're alluding to the fact that if Iran understood what's good for it, it would start producing nuke in earnest, because we know what happens to countries who do not have such capabilities. They get invaded. First, they get sanctioned for years on end until they're weak enough and you can buy your way within the regime, orchestrate a coup on the inside, or weaken the institutions to such an extent that after a 1 month bombing campaign, you modify their defense, air defense, and then you can come in with the ground troops. So this is the same playbook, but this time around, and we come back to what you were saying in your initial presentation, is we have a strategic agreement with the Russians.
Yes.
And the Russians, to the extent Iran does not initiate anything, but only acts as per Article 51 of the UN Charter, Russia has an obligation to come to Iran's assistance. So this changing the whole configuration here. So this jeopardizes, even any kind of attempt or pretense to put an end to the situation in Ukraine, and or even developing bilateral relation with Russia, with everything that this implies as far as real mineral deals. And God knows Russia has plenty of them, which the US needs. So I think it's all about posturing in the end. I think it's not going to amount to much. But the idea, again, is to say Trump has to somehow be able to turn to his Israeli donor class and say, hey, short of shooting myself in the head here, which is irrational, you will at least agree on that, right?
Yeah.
I have to be there so I can fight for you another day, right? Otherwise, what's the point? No, it's a zero-sum game. Nobody's gonna win here because X, Y, and Z, you know, U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and even you guys will be, rained upon in terms of missiles, including on the Dimona
Right.
power plant. And so then, if there's a radiation fallout, uh, the latter is not going to care whether it's a Palestinian or an Israeli. It's good night Gracie for everyone. So
Well,
even in Tel Aviv, they ought to be able to show to be sensible to such arguments.
you think
Now,
so?
Russia has, well, yeah. I mean, I know we're dealing with a death cult, especially under the current iteration. I know those Kahani, crazies in Netanyahu's cabinet,
Yeah.
but I'm assuming they still have, the instinct of self-preservation to the extent they have
Okay.
this. They want to
I
build
hear
this
you.
new temple in place in lieu of the Al-Aqsa mosque and push for this Greater Israel project. How is that going to be advanced? Fundamentally, if your home base is completely obliterated, it
Destroyed.
makes
Yeah.
no sense. So there's only that much you can do. But God knows, I mean, the Israelis, they are known to be very pushy. I mean, you kick them out of the window, they come back by the chimney. No pun intended.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
they'll try. They'll try everything they can. So yeah, but at the end of the day, again, it is what it is,
Mhm.
and you know, it
I
is
hope you're
not
right.
feasible.
I hope you're
Yeah,
right.
yes, it's
I
not gonna
definitely hope
it's not
you're
gonna
right.
happen. But
Um,
Trump again, not unlike with Zelensky, Trump needs to be able to say, hey, I've done everything I could. I mean, look, I'm working. I'm pushing the agenda as you recommended. I'm addressing the issue, but I'm faced with hardcore data here, and if we do the calculus, whichever way we look at it from that point on, no one wins.
I hope you're
So
right.
we have to sit down, get the Russians involved. So the Russians, they talk to everybody in the region. That's
Mhm.
their strength, because they have like 1/5 of the Israeli population is of Russian extraction. So
I didn't know that.
yeah,
Oh, I
yes,
didn't
one
know that.
fifth,
Wow.
20% of Israelis are Russian Jews. So you know, uh,
Interesting.
Ru- and historically, Russia, I mean, they have to. I mean, they were the one who liberated the camps, right? So
Right.
you know,
Right.
so at some point, Trump can make the argument, say, we can get the Russians involved to keep, the Iranian threat under control. Push comes to shove.
Mhm.
I have guarantees. You know the guy. He's trustworthy. When he gives his word on something, he keeps it, right?
Yeah.
So that is how this whole thing is going to go down. But we have to go through the Trump boastful, approach. That's what he does. He's, you know, that's his
And,
shtick.
and to be fair, Iran did say they were willing to negotiate back channel. So I get the
Yes,
sense that they're open to these negotiations. I don't get the sense that they would stop funding Hezbollah or give up their own missile program. I think that's outrageous.
that's a
Um,
non-starter.
yeah, that's a non-starter. If that's where they're trying to start from, oh, that's a non-starter. No country is going to, unilaterally um, give away its ability to defend itself. That's the entire point of a country, to be able to defend itself. The beating heart of the country is the military. So no, that's a non-starter. I want to go to Le Pen. You brought this up to me when you was like, "Hey, are we going to hit Le Pen?" Yes, let's hit Le Pen. I am amazed at the turn Europe is taking. Whether it's Romania and Carlin Gorgescu, whether it's Le Pen, this is rather astonishing that these courts are finding ways to keep leading candidates that are skeptical of the war off the ballot. Like Karlin Gagetscu, his thing was like, look, I don't want a military base in Romania. Why do I want to get involved in some kind of war? This is out, this nonsense. He wins the first round, goes into the second round. He's winning the second round. The court kills the election immediately, just stops it, and said that the Russians were using TikTok ads to overwhelm the voter base with disinformation. Now, this ended up being nonsense. It was nonsense on its face. Same thing with Le Pen. Apparently, they're saying that she embezzled money or apparently used campaign funds inappropriately. I would wager to you, if they look very hard at the other candidates, they would find something similar. But of course, I think it's selective. I could be wrong. Maybe she did do it. I don't know. But the remedy that they've come up with is keep her off the ballot for 2027. That is amazing, considering she most likely would have won, and she would have most likely been very skeptical of this war and continued money to this war. Meaning Macron is trying to put troops, as he calls it. I don't think he's going to do it, but whatever. Him in the UK talked about putting troops in Ukraine. She's not on that page. Give me your thoughts on this. You brought it up, so I'm super curious on your thinking.
Yes. Well, I guess the issue is about this l'exécution provisoire. So the ineligibility aspect is effective, even though she still has the option to appeal the decision. That's in and of itself something that's unprecedented in French political life, and as it were, it translates essentially in the judiciary branch stepping in and deciding that for 11 million French voters who voted for her last election, there won't be a Marine Le Pen on the ballot.
Right.
So this poses a very unprecedented situation. But to be honest, if we look at the facts of the case, she was warned repeatedly, and she had reason to know that down the road they would try to use every trick in the book. Because the misconception of the European parliamentary members of the National Rally was that if it's not explicitly prohibited by the rules at the European Parliament, because there is no law that states explicitly that you cannot do what they've done.
Right.
There's just a somewhat vaguely worded sets of rules, you would say bylaws at the European Parliament. And yes, every party is doing it. And obviously, one of the arguments made by the defense was that we are elected on a list at the national level, and we are representing a party, and we are representing people who feel like we should try to change the European Union from within. So you cannot blame us by saying that we are using, those funds to undermine the European Union. Otherwise, there cannot be any kind of talks about democratic discourse here. Because essentially, if we don't use those funds to promote the European Union and further integration and everything that defines characterizes the European Union, then basically we have no rights whatsoever. And I guess the defense basically that was a good argument, but indeed it is what it is. The misconception is to try to understand that the European Union is actually a forum where all kind of diverse ideas can be exchanged. It's not. It's a project, and that's heading toward withdrawing sovereignty to EU member states and turning their national leadership as mere figurehead. So to the extent you're going against the grain as far as the agenda, the ultimate agenda is concerned, obviously, yes, you're going to become a target, and this is what happened. Now, a lot of people have been drawing a parallel with another party, which is the party of the current prime minister in France, François Bayrou, who was kind of doing the same thing, albeit to in less, in smaller quantities. But I mean, to me, a crime is a crime. If it's a violation, whether it's about 7 million euros or 200,000 euros in Bayrou's case, it doesn't really matter, right? But Beirut is party is the one that allowed Macron to get a majority in the National Assembly, or at least who voted with the Macron's party to adopt some of the most controversial legislation. So we can see that ultimately it really comes down to window dressing as far as how do you get rid of people who are not on the page. Once upon a time, not that long ago, you would basically take them out, round them up at night with a knock on the door at 6 in the morning or whatever, and disappear them. Well,
Right.
today, dictatorship are a little bit more savvy and sophisticated, and they try to somehow, use the institutions at their disposal and window dress the whole thing. But essentially, the result is the same: is that you are disenfranchising, millions upon millions of voters. But we're dealing with a system that has its back against the wall right now. I mean, the
Mhm.
economics are terrible. This whole shenanigan bearing on the existential threat posed by Russia is only but a veneer allowing for the biggest heist to date of people's savings, right? So they're gunning for it. It's the Hail Mary. They're really that close to accomplishing their goal, which is to create a supranational state, and they're not going to allow any kind of democratic niceties to get into the way of things. Whether it's about preserving the eastern flank of NATO in Romania, or taking the chance of having one of Europe's pillar, i.e., France, being taken over by a party that is anywhere but where we want to be.
They would have to do the same thing with the AfD in Germany,
Well,
because at some point,
they
yeah,
would have had the AfD won outright the election, but to the extent they came in second, uh, the AfD was essentially ostracized, as the National Rally has been ostracized in France. It's the
right.
same method. It's called in France they call it le Front Républicain. It goes back to 1986. So
Mhm.
the AfD is subjected to the German version of the Front Républicain. That's it. We don't want any populist party to participate in any way, shape, or form in the running of any countries in Europe, especially Germany and or France, which again are two of the big heavyweights.
I, I get the sense they can't keep that up. There's no way they can keep that up. I mean, the numbers for Le Pen's party, it's National Front or National Rally. It's one of those, National Rally, I believe. And AFD are increasing, and they've been increasing one election after the next, after the next. And at some point, that behavior becomes very overt that you're going to have to take. Like it's going to be very provocative. And the way that they took Le Pen off is very provocative. I get the sense it's going to piss people off. It's not going to be, oh, they took her off the ballot. Oh, well. I get the sense it's going to be, how dare they undercut our capability of voting in this way by taking this kind of um, this provocative act to remove a candidate from the ballot. I mean, or do you think I'm wrong on that? I mean, like the Carla Gogetsku thing, for example, has had massive protests in response to it. And I get the sense that Le Pen is going to create a similar effect.
Yeah, well, two things here. One would have to compare the political culture both in Romania and France. In Romania, you have more of a homogeneous population which understands where its interests are, and so they
Mhm.
might be more likely to organize and engage in forceful protest at the very least. Would that be a success? I don't know. To the extent Brussels has prerogative, they can deploy what are de facto European troops now. There's a mechanism called Eurogender 4, which is composed of several member state gendarmerie, police forces, military police, I guess, because gendarmerie
What?
is. Yes, so they can do what the Soviet Union of old used to do when there was a problem in one of the republics. They would send Soviet, I guess, yeah, from the center. The center would send like special forces to quench the revolt or the uprising.
Yeah.
So ultimately, that's what I would see happen if the situation somewhat gets out of control in Romania. As far as France is concerned, I think after the Yellow Vest movement, a lot of people have been somehow coaxed into, not making any waves. I don't
Mhm.
see, I don't see the French people, really reacting in that sense more than just complaining about it. I mean, um, I just don't see it. I
Yeah.
don't think the French people of today is the French people of 100 years ago. To begin with.
That's unfortunate. That is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are just into their consumerism, their hedonism, and the French substrat is fractured right now. I mean, what's the French people as such? I mean, I would say there's at least three different segments of the constituting population of France. And all of them are diverging. It's 30%. It's reflected in the makeup of the parliament. You have
Mhm.
three different factions, and so this is not, to me, something that shows any kind of revolt. I doubt it. It's not going to happen.
That's unfortunate.
And like
I
you
mean,
said,
maybe it's,
if there was to be a revolt, then the system would use, because this is how they do it. They create a situation which anybody normally constituted would revolt against, and then they deem this act of revolt as an act of sedition, which legalizes and justifies a major crackdown, which
Mhm.
I guess would take the shape of what I just described. If in Romania things get out of control, Brussels will also send Eurogender 4 to crack down on the protest.
By the way,
Why?
before I let
Because the
you go,
French police would not do it themselves. This is, those are their
yeah,
sons, daughters. So you have to send people from, Eastern Europe to do it. They don't care. That's also why they want Ukraine probably into the European Union, because if you need to send thugs to crack down on national aspiration, you can send, Ukrainians. They'll do it, no problem.
yeah. Before
Yes.
I let you go, I have to get into the tariffs. So apparently, Russia was not on the list of tariffs, which raised eyebrows for people. Um, why do you think he's doing this? I mean, like, there is no war in the sense that the U.S. is, and Trump didn't have to do it. He didn't campaign on this. This is kind of out of the blue, where he's like, "Yeah, tariffs are the weapon now that I'm going to use to reshape the global economy." One, do you think he's going to get what he wants out of this, which is this kind of reshuffling of the global economy where it's in America's best interest? Um, and two, well, I guess the first question is why do you think he's doing it? And two, do you think he's going to be successful in whatever he's trying to accomplish with these tariffs?
Well, again, here I would have two remarks. The first one is that uh, policy predicated on imposing tariff is not fundamentally a flawed policy. The problem is you need time for the substantial, the structural result that you wish to accomplish to take place, and he
Mhm.
doesn't have time. I mean, the midterms are going to be in less than 2 years.
Yes.
So that's wholly insufficient to restructure your industrial base, because that's what he wants. He wants basically manufacturing to come back in the US. But you're talking about a 30-year outsourcing of the industrial base. It happened in increments, slowly but surely. So that's not going to do it in 2 years' time. This is not going to
Agreed.
be sufficient.
Agreed.
The second thing, in terms of his political communication, is that, well, Trump has to occupy the space. So, if he feels that, news are not too good on the geopolitical front, foreign policy wise, he has to basically occupy the space. Sarkozy was known to do that in France. We
Mhm.
called him the hyper president. Too much communication, too much in your face. He does this, he does that. Sometimes the best way to do it is to be quiet. Don't be so like omnipotent in the media. Why?
Yeah.
Because you're the president. You are the arbiter. You are the ultimate authority. You're the voice of reason. And so if you cheapen your voice by constantly having an opinion on every single thing, and we see you every day on TV talking about anything from the weather to who's going to win the World Series. But that again, that's Trump's style, and
Yeah.
we live in an age of media, and he has to occupy the media stage any way, shape, or form, and so it is what it is.
But these are going to hit workers more than anybody else. Meaning, I think Trump would even acknowledge that in the short term, it's going to hurt. But he is talking about effectively, we're going to do this and then we're going to give a tax cut, which is going to go to the richest. So the poorest in the country are going to become poor because they're going to be paying more across the board. And the richer are going to get richer because Trump is going to give them a massive tax cut from whatever they make on these tariffs.
I agree.
Just
It makes no
amazing.
sense on its face. I mean, what you should do is invest heavily, create a fund, if anything, into R&D and try to create entire new industries. That's what you should be doing. And form people, train them on those new jobs, those high-paying jobs. I mean, this is. But again, you look at Russia today, it enjoys a measure of success, and all the indicators, economic indicators, are in the green. But why? Because it's a 25-year economic policy
Mhm.
that has been implemented in stages, starting with in the 2000s with trying to promote and develop an economy based on the sale of oil and gas, and try to reinvest then all those dividends into developing the infrastructure, allowing people to live better, invest in the middle class, try to build your middle class. I mean, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
JFK said it best. We need a robust middle class. What makes a strong economy? When everybody, in the middle. I mean, you're always going to have poor people, right, and very rich people. But if you have a very bulgy middle, people who are doing well and they're buying houses, they're they're consuming, but this can only be predicated on jobs. You need to create
Right.
jobs, and I'm not talking about bullshit jobs where you need to juggle two or three of them just to merely make ends meet. I'm talking about real jobs, but those real jobs can only be created if you create the new industries, and
Agreed.
those new industries, they require R&D. So there's no magic wand, in other words. Otherwise, I mean, we're dealing with snake oil salesmen.
I I think that's what we're dealing with. A snake oil salesman.
Yeah.
I think he's going to damage the people who effectively voted for him. Arnaud, man, thank you for this. Arnaud Develay. We covered a lot. It's Arnaud Develay is author, political analyst, and international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His latest books is Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America Political Consensus. Arnaud, is there anywhere else people can find you, by the way?
Well, they can join me on my page on 21st Century Wire. I publish there. Otherwise, they can join me on my Telegram channel, Indictux Lex.
Very cool. Man, thank you for this. I always appreciate these conversations. Thank you. You have a good one.
Thank you.
Be safe.